That was the price my own son put on my head. 17 minutes after his mother's heart stopped beating, he was already asking about the inheritance, like a vulture that doesn't even wait for the body to cool. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to whoever's watching. My name is Henry Richards. I'm 73 years old, retired from the Federal Reserve, where I worked for over 30 years as a financial analyst. I've lived here in Columbus, Ohio since I was born. I was born, raised, and grew old in this Midwest state that I love so much. Today I live alone in a simple house in the Clintonville neighborhood, after having donated everything I built in my life. But it wasn't always like this. If you're enjoying this story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Every day there's a new story here on this channel. And look, this story I'm going to tell today is one of those that squeezes your heart, but needs to be told as a warning to many parents who, like me, gave everything for their children. I worked my entire life to provide comfort for my family. I woke up at 5 in the morning, drove an hour to get to the bank, came back only after 8 at night. I never complained. It was my duty as a father and husband. With Margaret, my beloved wife, we built a good life without extravagant luxuries, but with comfort and security. We put our only son, Brian, through the best schools. We paid for law school at NYU, then a master's degree abroad that cost a fortune. All because we believed that education is the best inheritance. For years we saved every penny. We lived well, but always thinking about the future. I bought some properties to rent out, made safe investments. I accumulated a considerable wealth over decades of hard work. I wasn't mansion and yacht rich, but I had achieved financial security that many people only dream of having. $8 million in total assets, money earned through sweat, built brick by brick, with sacrifice and honesty. What I didn't know was that while I was counting the bricks of our family building, my son Brian was counting the days until Margaret and I departed this world. Not out of anticipated grief, no, but out of pure, cruel greed. But life has these ironies. On the most important day of his life, his own wedding, was when the mask fell off, and it happened in the most public and painful way possible. 400 people witnessed when my only son called me a miserable old man and a senile old fool who won't die. 400 people also saw when I revealed who Brian really was. And if you think this story already started heavy, believe me. What comes next is even harder to tell, because some wounds, even after years, still bleed when we touch them. I was born in rural Ohio, in a small town called Liberty, about 60 miles from here in Columbus. My father was a small farmer, grew a little of everything: corn, soybeans, wheat, potatoes. Life on the farm was hard but honest. We woke up with the roosters crow and worked until sunset. From an early age, I learned the value of hard work and hard-earned money. By age 10, I was already helping on the farm. At 14, I was selling our produce at the town farmers market on weekends. I attended a rural school where the teacher taught children of different ages all at once. Even so, I always liked numbers. I was good at math, did mental calculations that impressed even adults. It was my teacher, Ms. Elizabeth, who told my father, "Mr. Richards, this boy has a future with numbers. It's a waste to keep him just on the farm." With great sacrifice, my father sent me to Columbus to finish my education. I lived with an aunt, worked as a delivery boy, as a store clerk, as an office assistant, all to support myself and help at home. I studied economics at night while working during the day. Nothing fell from the sky for me. Every achievement was earned through sweat. I passed the Federal Reserve exam when I was 26. It was the greatest joy of my life until then. Stability, good salary, respect. I remember my elderly father crying when I told him I had passed. "My son is a doctor at the Federal Reserve," he would tell everyone back home with that pride shining in his eyes. My work at the bank was in financial analysis and oversight. I verified the financial health of institutions, analyzed data, prepared reports. I was meticulous, detail-oriented. My superiors recognized my work. I was promoted several times. I reached a management position. I had my own office with my name on the door. That was a source of pride for a farm boy who started from nothing. The routine was demanding. I would wake up early, drink a strong black coffee that Margaret prepared, grab my leather briefcase, her gift for my 30th birthday, and leave for work. I'd come home late, often with extra work to do at home. On weekends, I studied new regulations, kept myself updated. The financial world never stops, it's always changing, and I needed to keep up. It was at the Federal Reserve that I met Margaret. She worked in the administrative department, always elegant with her suits and her hair in a bun. A serious, competent, discreet woman. It took me 6 months to gather the courage to invite her for coffee. When I finally did, she smiled and said, "I thought you'd never ask, Henry." Our courtship was like us, unhurried and without exaggeration. After 2 years, we got married in a simple ceremony, just with family and close friends. We bought a small house with a mortgage in the Hilliard area. We furnished it gradually. Margaret had refined taste. Even with little money, she made everything beautiful and cozy. Our life was simple but happy. Brian was born 3 years after our marriage. Margaret had a difficult pregnancy, was on bed rest for the last few months. When he arrived, he was a tiny baby, but with powerful lungs. He cried so much that we spent sleepless nights. Even so, he was our joy, our miracle. I worked double to compensate for the time Margaret was away from the bank. I did overtime, accepted missions in other cities, all to provide comfort for my son. From early on, we gave him the best. Private school, English classes, swimming, the latest model computer. When Brian was 7, I managed to buy a car, a silver Chevy Lumina, brand new. How proud I felt taking my little boy to school in my own car. But we never let him become spoiled. We always taught the value of work, honesty and effort. At least we thought we were teaching. As Brian grew, we noticed he was different. Intelligent, no doubt, but always calculating. From an early age, he measured efforts, only did what brought him some advantage. In adolescence, the problems began. Low grades, complaints from teachers, some small lies we discovered. "It's a phase," Margaret would say. "All teenagers go through this." I believed her, or wanted to believe. We increased his allowance, gave him a new computer, then a car when he turned 18. We thought it was just lack of motivation, that he would soon find his way. Brian chose law. "I want to be a judge, Dad," he told me. My chest swelled with pride. Imagine having a son who's a judge. We paid for his education at NYU, one of the most expensive universities in New York. I bought all the books he asked for, set up a home office for him to study. When he graduated, we organized a party that cost almost all our savings for the year. That's when the request for a master's degree abroad came. "I need to specialize, Dad. With an international master's, I can apply for better positions." Margaret and I talked. It would be a huge sacrifice. We would have to sell an apartment we had bought as an investment, but we decided to support him. After all, it was for the future of our only son. Brian spent 2 years in England doing a master's in international law. The money we sent every month was a heavy burden on our budget. We cut trips, restaurants, new clothes, everything for his future. When he returned with the diploma, another request. He wanted to set up his own firm. "A lawyer needs to have a presence, Dad. A good address, quality furniture, a secretary." Once again, we tightened our belts, mortgaged the house to get the money. We set up a first-class office in Bexley, an upscale area of Columbus. Brian finally seemed on track in his professional life. It was during this time that we began to notice deeper changes. Brian became distant, quick phone calls, increasingly rare visits. When he came home, he was always in a hurry, looking at his watch. He talked a lot about money, about rich clients, about imported cars he wanted to buy. "It's normal," Margaret would say, always defending her son. "He's building his career, he has to network with important people." I agreed, but something inside me was starting to bother me. A small voice saying that perhaps we had raised our son with the wrong values, that perhaps he only saw us as a source of resources, not of love or wisdom. Then, 3 years ago, came Margaret's diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer, already in an advanced stage. Our life turned upside down. Suddenly, it wasn't about work, money, or achievements anymore. It was about time. How much time would we still have together? Brian rarely appeared at the hospital, always with excuses. "I have a hearing. I'm with an important client. I need to file an appeal." Margaret disguised her sadness, but I could see the pain of her son's absence in her eyes. In the final months, Margaret declined rapidly. I slept beside her in the hospital, held her hand as she moaned in pain. Brian promised to come on Sunday. He didn't. He called saying he was in an important meeting. In the last week, she got much worse. I called Brian, insisted he come. He showed up for half an hour, looked at his cell phone the whole time, left saying he had a commitment. When Margaret passed away on a Tuesday at 2:15 p.m., I was alone with her. I held her hand until her last breath, cried hugging her body until the nurses gently pulled me away. It was the worst moment of my life. 17 minutes later, at 2:32 p.m., my cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Brian. That's when everything changed. That's when I understood who my son really was, and it was the beginning of a path that would lead us months later to that fateful wedding day, with 400 people witnessing the truth about the man I had raised. That cell phone vibrated in my pocket while I was still hugging Margaret's body. You know, there are moments in life that mark us like a hot iron. That was one of them. To this day, it seems I can still feel the heat of that device against my leg, like a presage of what was to come. With trembling hands and a face still wet with tears, I took the phone. It was a message from Brian. I thought it was to ask about his mother, perhaps asking forgiveness for not being present in her final moments. But what I read, my God in heaven, was like taking a punch to the stomach. Mum finally died. How much is in her account? I need the money today. I read and reread that message about 5 times. I couldn't believe it. My tear-blurred eyes might be deceiving me, but there it was, written in that cold, calculating way. Finally died, as if his own mother's death was an inconvenience he was waiting to be over with, and then, without a single word of regret, already asking about the money. I stared at that message for so long that the phone screen even went dark. When it lit up again, another message from him appeared. "Stop crying, old man. Focus on what matters, money." I felt my legs weaken. I had to sit in a chair right there in the hospital room. A nurse came in, saw my state, and asked if I was feeling ill. I couldn't even answer. How could I explain to her that I had just discovered that my only son, whom Margaret and I had raised with so much love and sacrifice, was a monster disguised as a person? I didn't respond to the messages. I had neither strength nor words. I put the phone in my pocket and began the procedures for Margaret's funeral. Throughout that painful process, the release of the body, the choice of the casket, the preparation of the wake, Brian didn't show up. He sent messages asking about money, about transfers, about bank accounts, but didn't have the decency to help organize his own mother's funeral. When I looked at the phone once more, already at the end of that terrible day, I saw the third message. This was the one that tore me apart inside the most. "Hope you die soon too. $8 million in your account, right? I need it." I sat on my bed, looking at the side where Margaret had slept until a few days before, and cried like a child. It wasn't just for her death. Though that pain was immense, it was for the death of something else, the image I had of my son. At that moment, I understood that the Brian I thought I had raised never really existed. It was just an illusion that Margaret and I had fed for years. The wake was the next day. Brian finally appeared, well dressed in an expensive suit that I had probably helped pay for. He greeted some people, received condolences. From a distance, he looked like a grieving son, but when he approached me, he whispered in my ear, "I've already spoken with the bank manager. Tomorrow we'll transfer Mom's money, okay?" I looked into his eyes, searching for some sign of humanity, of remorse, of pain. I found nothing but a cold calculation, a barely disguised impatience. Those eyes were no longer those of the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, who cried when he got hurt and ran into my arms. They were the eyes of a stranger who saw in me only an obstacle between him and the money he so desired. "Brian, your mother just died. Can't we talk about this later?" He huffed impatiently. "Dad, stop the drama. Death is part of life. We need to resolve the practical issues." Practical issues. That's how he saw the departure of the mother who had carried him in her womb, who had breastfed him, who spent nights awake when he had a fever, who gave up her own career to take care of him. A practical issue to be resolved. At that moment, something died inside me too. In the days that followed, Brian gave me no peace. Phone calls, messages, surprise visits at home, always with the same subject: money. He wanted to know how much was in the accounts, which investments, which properties. He talked about selling everything, liquidating the assets to make things easier, he said. But I knew what that meant. He wanted to get his hands on everything as quickly as possible. Brian, I just lost my companion of 40 years. I need time to process this. Time doesn't pay my bills, Dad. I have some important investments to make, opportunities that won't wait. That's when I began to suspect something else was wrong. What were these urgent investments? Brian had a well-established law firm. At least that's what he always said. Why such a rush for money? I began to investigate discreetly. I called some lawyer friends I knew from when I still worked. I asked for information about my son's firm. What I discovered left me even more devastated. The firm was drowning in debt. Brian had taken loans from loan sharks to maintain a luxurious lifestyle. Imported cars, designer clothes, international trips. The facade of success he maintained was just that, a facade. Behind it was a bottomless pit of debts, mismanagement, and risky bets. But the last straw came when I discovered about Jessica. Brian had been engaged for 6 months to a woman I had never seen, a Jessica, daughter of a rich doctor in the city, Dr. Paul Mendoza, owner of a chain of clinics. The wedding was scheduled for a few months later, with a party for 400 guests at one of the most luxurious hotels in Columbus. And who was paying for half of that extravagance? Me, of course, though I didn't know it yet. One day, Brian showed up at my house with a contract for me to sign. It was a power of attorney, giving him authority to manage all my assets and accounts. It's for your own good, Dad. You're very shaken by Mom's death. You're not in a condition to handle finances. That was confirmation that he saw me only as an obstacle, a stone in his path to my money. I took the contract, read it carefully, and tore it up in front of him. I won't sign this, Brian, and from now on, I want you to respect me as your father, not as your bank. His reaction was frightening, his face contorted with rage, his eyes flashing with hatred. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of my own son. You'll regret this, old man. You don't know who you're messing with. He left, slamming the door so hard that a picture frame fell from the wall and broke. It was a photo of us, the 3 of us together, on a trip to Myrtle Beach. Me, Margaret, and Brian smiling at the camera. It looked like a photo from another life, of people who no longer existed. The weeks passed and Brian disappeared. He didn't call, didn't show up. On one hand, it was a relief. On the other, I began to worry about what he might be planning. Something told me this story wasn't over yet. One day I received an envelope at home. It was a wedding invitation printed on expensive paper with gold lettering. Brian and Jessica invited me to the ceremony that would be held in 2 months at the Grand Plaza Hotel. In the envelope was a handwritten note. Dad, I hope you've reconsidered. I need your financial help for the wedding. Jessica deserves a party worthy of her family. Don't make me look bad. There wasn't a word of affection, of longing, of concern for my state after Margaret's death. It was just another request for money, disguised as an invitation. I decided it was time to meet this Jessica and her family. Perhaps they didn't know what kind of man was about to enter their family. I got the address of Dr. Paul's main clinic and went there, introducing myself as the father of his daughter's fiancé. Dr. Paul received me in his office. An educated man, already greying with that air of someone who had worked seriously and competently his entire life. We chatted about trivial matters for a few minutes, until he touched on the subject of the wedding. Your son is a very ambitious young man, Mr. Richards. He talked a lot about your businesses, the investments, the properties. So that was it. Brian was selling an image of wealth and success that didn't match reality. Using my assets, earned through decades of honest work, to impress his father-in-law and bride. I didn't have the courage to deny everything at that moment. I just thanked him for the reception and said we would see each other at the wedding. I left there with a heavy heart, but with a decision made. I would no longer finance my son's lies. When Brian called me days later, demanding money for the wedding, I went straight to the point. "I won't pay for a party that only serves to feed your lies, Brian." "What are you talking about, Dad?" "You know very well. You're selling a false image to your father-in-law, to your fiancée, using my name, my money." He was silent for a few seconds, then completely changed his tone of voice. "Dad, I'm sorry. I've been nervous with the wedding preparations, with Mom's absence. I know I was rude to you, but this wedding is important to me. Jessica is a good woman. She'll help me be a better person. Please don't abandon me at this moment." That sudden change in behavior caught me by surprise. It was the old Brian, the son I thought I had raised. For a moment, I almost believed it. Almost. "I'll think about it, Brian, but I don't promise anything." I hung up the phone with a strange feeling. Part of me wanted to believe my son was truly sorry, that the wedding could be a new beginning for him. Another more cautious part distrusted that sudden change. The next day I received an unexpected visit. It was Jessica, Brian's fiancée, pretty, young, with that manner of a woman raised in comfort, but without the arrogance that often accompanies privilege. "Mr. Richards, excuse me for coming without notice, but I needed to meet the father of the man I'm going to marry." The conversation was polite, even pleasant. Jessica seemed genuinely interested in me, in the family stories, in Margaret's photos that still decorated the living room. At a certain point, she commented, "Brian talks so much about you, about your example of work, of honesty. He says everything he knows about finances he learned from his father." That put me on alert. What game was my son playing now? "Jessica, do you and Brian talk about money, about your financial future?" She blushed a little before answering. "Brian told me you'll help us at the beginning until his firm grows more, that there's a family agreement." So that was it. Brian was promising his fiancée a future financed by me, creating expectations I had never agreed to meet. "Jessica, I think there's a misunderstanding here. No such agreement exists. Brian is a grown man, responsible for his own support." Her face lost some color. I tried to soften it. "But of course, as a father, I'll always help as much as I can within my possibilities." She smiled, a nervous smile, and quickly changed the subject. When she left the impression that her visit had a specific purpose, to confirm whether the agreement mentioned by Brian really existed. The following weeks were ones of tense silence. Brian didn't seek me out anymore, didn't insist on the wedding money. For a moment, I thought he had finally understood the limits I had established. How naive of me. A week before the wedding, I received a call from Dr. Paul, Jessica's father. His voice was tense, worried. "Henry, we need to talk. It's about Brian." We met at a cafe downtown. Dr. Paul didn't waste time with small talk. "Your son owes money to dangerous people, loan sharks, you understand? I discovered it by chance when one of these individuals showed up at my clinic looking for him." My heart tightened, so the debts were even bigger than I had imagined. "How much?" "Much more than a young lawyer could pay with his normal work. Brian came to me asking for help. He said it was to save the family's honor, that you had made some wrong investments, and now everyone was threatened." That lie hit me like a slap. Brian wasn't just in debt up to his neck. He was using my name to try to extract money from his future father-in-law. "Paul, I need to be honest with you. Brian is lying. I didn't make any wrong investment. In fact, I rarely allow him to get involved in my finances." The doctor looked at me with a mixture of relief and concern. I suspected it was something like that. Brian has a certain pattern of behavior that started to worry me. Jessica is in love. She doesn't see the signs that to me are obvious. What signs? Ostentation without real basis, grandiose promises, mood changes when contradicted, manipulation. I listened to those words with a heavy heart. They were the same signs I had been ignoring for years, attributing them to a phase, to stress, to anything other than what they really were, my son's problematic character. "What do you intend to do, Paul?" He sighed, running his hand through his graying hair. "I can't forbid Jessica from getting married. She's an adult, makes her own choices, but I won't contribute financially to this wedding anymore, and I'll insist on a rigorous prenuptial agreement." I nodded. It was a sensible decision. It would at least protect his family's assets. And you, Henry, what will you do? The question hung between us. What would I do? Would I continue to feed my son's lies and schemes? Or would I finally put an end to that situation? I'll go to the wedding, I replied after a few seconds. I need to see for myself how far Brian is willing to go. We said goodbye with a firm handshake, two fathers concerned about the paths their children were choosing. On the eve of the wedding, Brian appeared at my house. He was nervous, agitated. He talked about the preparations, about how everything needed to be perfect. Jessica deserves the best, Dad. Her family is used to a certain standard. And are you prepared to maintain that standard after the wedding, Brian? He hesitated for a moment, then opened that smile I knew so well, the smile he used when he was a child, when he wanted to convince me or his mother of something. With your help, Dad, of course I am. We're family, aren't we? Families help each other. So that's what I am to you now? A family bank? The smile faltered for a moment, but quickly recovered. What nonsense, Dad. You're my hero, you always have been. I'm just asking for a little push at this important moment in my life. I looked at that man in front of me, because that's what Brian was now, a 35-year-old man, not a boy anymore, and clearly saw the manipulation in every word, in every gesture. How blind had I been for so long? I'll be at the wedding tomorrow, Brian, as your father, not as your bank. He frowned, a flash of irritation crossing his face. Whatever. But remember that you promised to pay for half the party. I've already signed contracts with the hotel counting on that. I hadn't promised anything, but at that moment I decided to make one last sacrifice, not for Brian, but for myself, to close that chapter of my life with dignity. I'll pay my part, but it will be the last money you receive from me, Brian. From now on you live on what you produce. He smiled victoriously, not realizing the seriousness of what I had just said. I knew I could count on you, Big Dad. When he left, I stood looking out the window, watching his imported car drive away. I took my phone and reread the messages he had sent on the day of Margaret's death. Mom finally died. Hope you die soon, too. Those cold, cruel words, written by the man I had raised as my son. I made my decision. If Brian wanted war, he would have war, but it would be on my terms, not his. The wedding day arrived sunny and warm, typical of Columbus. The Grand Plaza Hotel was decorated with white and gold flowers, everything very elegant and expensive. I parked my simple car among the luxurious vehicles of the guests and entered the hall wearing my best suit, the same one I wore at Margaret's funeral. The guests were already arriving, filling the space. I recognized some faces, Brian's lawyer colleagues, some old family friends, many strangers who were probably from Jessica's social circle. Dr. Paul greeted me with a discreet nod from afar, his tense face showing that he too wasn't there for celebration, but out of obligation. Brian circulated among the guests, smiling in his role as the happy groom. When he saw me, he came over with a theatrical hug. Dad, glad you came. Come. Your table is in front with Jessica's family. I sat at the indicated table, observing everything around me. The extravagance, the waste, the falseness. Brian had mounted a spectacle of appearances, using money he didn't have. My money to impress people who probably didn't really care about him. The ceremony began. Jessica was beautiful in her white dress, entering arm in arm with her father. Dr. Paul maintained a serious countenance, fulfilling his role, but with no true joy in his eyes. The minister spoke about love, commitment, honesty, words that sounded empty in that context. After the exchange of rings came the reception, music, champagne, photos. Brian took the microphone to make his thank you speech. I want to thank everyone for being here on this special day, my lovely wife's family, especially Dr. Paul, who gave us so much support. I looked at the doctor, who maintained a polite smile, but his eyes told another story. And before the final vows, I want to talk about my father. Those words caught me by surprise. Brian was looking directly at me, a strange smile on his face. I smiled back, imagining that finally, at this important moment, he would recognize everything Margaret and I had done for him. How wrong I was. This miserable old man over there. He pointed at me with an accusing finger, his voice laden with contempt. Who insisted on coming even without being welcome, annoying old man who just won't die. A stunned silence fell over the hall. 400 people looking shocked as my own son publicly humiliated me on his wedding day. I saw Jessica turn pale. Dr. Paul frowned in disapproval, but Brian continued as if possessed by a demon of cruelty. You know what he did yesterday? Wanted to give his opinion on the decoration. Senile old fool wanting to have a say. Can hardly walk and wants to give orders. The laughter he expected didn't come. Just an embarrassed silence, pitying looks directed at me. Some guests shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. Jessica pulled his arm, trying to make him stop, but Brian ignored her, continuing with his performance of hatred. It was at that moment, with 400 pairs of eyes on me, that I made my final decision. I slowly rose from my chair, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the stage where Brian was standing. Each step seemed like an eternity. Brian, seeing me approach, gave a mocking laugh. Look, the old man, coming to speak. When I reached his side, I extended my hand for the microphone. He gave it to me with a scornful smile, probably expecting me to humiliate myself even more, perhaps begging for his forgiveness or trying to justify whatever he had invented about me. I adjusted the microphone, looked at the silent audience, and said in a calm voice, Brian is right. I am old. I paused, letting my next words have all the impact they deserved. But I have something to show. I took my phone from my pocket, that same phone that had vibrated on the day of Margaret's death, bringing the messages that changed my life forever. Brian, do you remember what you wrote to me the day your mother died? I saw his face turn pale. For the first time that night, the arrogant smile disappeared. Dad, this is not the time for this. I completely ignored him. I turned to one of the sound technicians who was next to the stage. Young man, could you help me connect my phone to the hall's big screen? The young man, sensing the tension of the situation, but not completely understanding what was happening, nodded and took my phone. In a few seconds, my phone screen was projected on the huge screen behind us. I'm going to show everyone who my son really is. Brian, the message he sent me the day Margaret died. My wife, his mother. Brian tried to grab the phone, but I pushed him away with a firm gesture. I opened the folder where I kept those messages. Messages I never had the courage to delete because they served as a reminder of the truth I needed to face. And there they were, enlarged on the screen for everyone to see. Brian, 2:32 p.m. Mom finally died. How much is in her account? I need the money today. Brian, 2:35 p.m. Stop crying, old man. Focus on what matters, money. Brian, 2:47 p.m. Hope you die soon too. $8 million in your account, right? I need it. An absolute silence took over the hall. Jessica had her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Dr. Paul was standing, indignation stamped on his face. The guests exchanged looks of shock and disgust. And Brian seemed to have been struck by lightning, paralyzed, his face white as paper. I continued, my voice now firmer, stronger. Margaret died at 2:15 p.m. 17 minutes later, Brian asked about the inheritance. Not about the funeral, about the money. I scrolled the screen to show more recent messages. Brian, last week. Old man still hasn't died. Need him to pass the money or I'll put him in a home. Brian, yesterday. Tomorrow I'll humiliate the old man. Maybe he'll have a heart attack. Ha ha ha. It was as if a bomb had silently exploded in that hall. Jessica was the first to react, screaming with all the strength of her lungs. Brian, is this true? Dr. Paul rose, his face red with anger. What kind of monster are you? The guests began to stand up, some leaving immediately, others talking in raised voices. I saw the best men at the altar taking off their boutonnieres, as if they no longer wanted to be part of it. Chaos was established, but I still wasn't finished. Brian, you wanted me to die for $8 million. He tried to speak, to stammer some justification, but I interrupted him. But there's one thing. I signaled for the sound technician to advance to another file I had on the phone. A photo of an official document appeared on the screen. I've donated 100% of my assets to charity. I read aloud what was written. Signed yesterday, registered. Reason: son wishes for my death. Brian's eyes widened in complete horror as he realized what that meant. $8 million, all donated. It was too much for him. I saw his eyes roll back, his legs weaken. Brian literally fainted there at the altar of his own wedding, falling with a dull thud to the floor. Jessica, instead of helping him, took a glass of water from the nearby table and threw it on him, shouting, "You lost $8 million for being a monster." And then, in a dramatic gesture I'll never forget, she tore off her veil, threw the bouquet to the ground, and ran out, the bride fleeing from her own wedding. Dr. Paul approached me while some guests tried to revive Brian. "Mr. Richards, forgive my daughter. She didn't know who Brian really was. Thank you for showing us." He squeezed my hand firmly, his eyes conveying a mixture of gratitude and regret. The minister, who had watched everything with an expression of absolute shock, finally found his voice. "I cannot celebrate this. It's a farce. God does not bless wickedness." And with those words, he too left, taking with him the sacred objects that would have been used in the final blessing. In 20 minutes, the hall was practically empty. Only a few hotel employees remained, perplexed by what they had witnessed, and Brian, already recovered from the fainting, sitting alone on the stage, crying like a child. I approached him one last time. "Dad, you ruined my wedding," he shouted, his face contorted with anger and despair. "No, Brian, your messages ruined it. Your greed ruined it. Your disrespect ruined it. I just showed the truth." I left that hotel leaving behind not only my son, but also the last illusions I still harbored about him. He was no longer the boy I had raised with so much love. He was a stranger, a man corrupted by greed, unable to feel genuine love for anyone. After the fateful wedding that didn't happen, I returned to my house alone. The silence seemed even heavier now, as if even the walls understood the magnitude of what had happened. I sat in Margaret's favorite armchair and stayed there looking at nothing, mentally reviewing the events of that night. I felt neither joy nor sadness for Brian's public exposure, just a strange peace, as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The truth, however painful it might be, was finally revealed, not only to me but to everyone who mattered in my son's life. What I didn't know at that moment was that my decision to save Brian's messages had been the trump card that saved me. I had always been methodical with documents, with records. I worked for decades at the Federal Reserve, where I learned that every detail matters, every record can make a difference. When I received those horrible messages on the day of Margaret's death, something inside me, perhaps an instinct for self-preservation, perhaps the invisible hand of my deceased wife guiding me, made me save them in a special folder, make backups, transfer them to the computer. Many people delete painful messages. They try to forget. I did the opposite. I kept every cruel word like someone keeping evidence of a crime, and in a way, it was a crime, the moral assassination of a father by his own son. In the days that followed the broken wedding, my phone didn't stop ringing. They were friends, acquaintances, even people I barely knew, all wanting to know details of the scandal that was already running through the entire city. Columbus may be a capital, but it still has the soul of a small town when it comes to gossip. The story of the son who humiliated his father at the altar and had his cruel messages exposed on the big screen became the talk of the town. I didn't answer most of the calls. I didn't want to feed gossip nor turn my family's tragedy into entertainment for the curious. But there were some people I needed to hear. Dr. Paul called me 3 days later. His voice was tired but firm. "Henry, how are you?" "Surviving, Paul, and you, how's Jessica?" He sighed on the other end of the line. "Devastated, as expected, but also relieved, if that makes sense. She said it's like waking up from a nightmare before it was too late." "I completely understand." "Henry, I called to thank you. What you did took courage. Many fathers would have covered up their sons' actions out of shame or misguided love. It wasn't easy, Paul, but it had to be done. For me, for Margaret, even for Brian, although he doesn't understand that now. You are a man of integrity, Henry. If you need anything, we're here." That call was a balm for my spirit. Amid so much chaos, knowing that someone recognized the justice of my act brought some comfort. Another call I answered was from Mrs. Johnson, our old neighbour, who had known Brian since he was little. She had been at the wedding, invited by me. "Mr. Richards, I've never seen anything like it in my life." "That boy, how can he speak that way about his own mother, about Mrs. Margaret, who was an angel on earth?" "I don't understand either, Martha. I raised him with love, with values. I don't know where we went wrong. Don't blame yourself, my friend. Some hearts are born crooked, and not even the purest love can straighten them." Her words, simple but profound, accompanied me in the days that followed. Some hearts are born crooked. Maybe it was true. Maybe Brian had been born with something missing inside him, some fundamental piece that allows empathy, genuine love. A week after the wedding, I received an unexpected visit. It was Jessica, alone without her father's presence. She seemed thinner, with deep dark circles, but there was a new determination in her gaze. "Mr. Richards, excuse me for coming without notice." "No need to apologize, Jessica. You're always welcome here." She sat in the living room, politely declining the coffee I offered. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her purse. "I came to say I've filed for annulment of the marriage. I don't even want the divorce process. I want it to be as if it never happened." "I understand, and I think it's the right decision." She looked at me with teary eyes. How didn't I see it? How was I so blind? All the signs were there. Don't blame yourself, Jessica. Brian is very good at creating illusions, at showing only what people want to see. He called me yesterday, said all that was staged, that you manipulated the messages out of jealousy because you didn't want to share the inheritance. I shook my head, not surprised by yet another attempt at manipulation. "And did you believe him?" "Not for a second." She wiped away a stubborn tear. I saw it in his eyes at that moment when the messages appeared on the screen. It was true. All of it was true. We talked for some time more. Jessica told me that Brian had started to show worrying signs in the last few months. Excessive jealousy, control over her finances, lies about his past. But she, in love and inexperienced, had ignored the warnings, attributing everything to stress from the wedding preparations. My father tried to warn me, you know. He said there was something wrong, that Brian seemed empty inside, but I thought it was just him being difficult, that he would never find anyone good enough for his only daughter. When Jessica left, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief knowing she had escaped in time from a life of manipulation and abuse. Sadness realizing once more the trail of pain my son left wherever he went. It was in the second week after the wedding incident that I discovered through a former colleague from the Federal Reserve that Brian was involved in questionable financial schemes. Not just debts with loan sharks, as I already knew, but possible fraud, use of inside information, even suspicion of money laundering for clients of dubious reputation. These discoveries left me even more shaken. My son wasn't just cruel and greedy. He was immersed in a world of illegalities, risking not only his reputation but his very freedom. I decided to seek professional help. Not for Brian. He would have to face the consequences of his choices, but for myself. I needed to understand how to deal with this situation, how to process the pain of having raised someone capable of such cruelty. I found Dr. Sarah, a therapist specializing in family issues. In our first meeting, I poured out the whole story, from the first suspicions to the public disaster of the wedding. She listened attentively, without judgments, only making occasional notes. "Mr. Richards, have you heard of antisocial personality disorder?" The term was new to me. She explained that people with this disorder often lack empathy, manipulate others for personal gain, lie compulsively, and feel no genuine remorse for their actions. "I'm not diagnosing your son. It would be unethical without evaluating him personally, but the behaviors you describe present some characteristics compatible with this condition. Is there treatment?" She hesitated before answering. "It's a disorder difficult to treat, mainly because the person rarely recognizes they need help. They don't see a problem in their behavior, only in the obstacles that others represent to their objectives." I left that consultation with much to think about. The idea that my son might have a serious mental disorder brought a new angle to the whole situation. It didn't justify his actions, but perhaps it explained the apparent inability to feel genuine love, to see people as more than means to achieve his ends. While I was trying to process all this, Brian's world was rapidly falling apart. The story of the wedding spread like wildfire. Clients began to abandon his firm, partners distanced themselves, doors closed. The video of the moment when the messages appeared on the screen, recorded by some guest, circulated in social media groups, reached local gossip pages, became the talk of the town. A month after the wedding, I received a call from Riverside Hospital. Brian had been found unconscious on the Scioto Bridge, apparently after trying to jump into the river. A fisherman saw him and called an ambulance in time. I rushed to the hospital, my heart divided between a father's natural concern and the emotional exhaustion of someone who had already been through too much. In the room, Brian was sedated, with restraint marks on his wrists, a sign he had tried to struggle, perhaps attack the medical staff. Dr. Morrison, the psychiatrist on duty, explained the situation to me. He had a psychotic break, Mr. Richards. He was alternating between compulsive crying and extreme aggressiveness. He repeatedly mentioned $8 million and old man, along with disconnected talk about being persecuted, about a conspiracy against him. What's the diagnosis? It's still too early for a definitive diagnosis, but there are signs of a complex condition, possibly antisocial personality disorder, as a base with a psychotic episode triggered by extreme stress. And now, what happens to him? I recommend psychiatric hospitalization for stabilization and more complete evaluation. Then, rigorous outpatient treatment with medication and therapy. I signed the hospitalization papers as his legal guardian. Despite everything, I was still his father. I couldn't simply turn my back, even after all he had done. Brian was transferred to a private psychiatric clinic, not as luxurious as he would have liked, but dignified, and with a good medical team. I used part of the money I had reserved for my retirement, since a large part of my assets were already in the donation process to the institutions I had chosen. The first visit I made to Brian at the clinic was one of the most difficult experiences of my life. He was sitting in an impersonal visiting room, wearing simple clothes provided by the institution, so different from the expensive suits he used to wear. His face had an empty expression, eyes without shine, probably the effect of the medications. "Brian, how are you feeling?" He slowly raised his eyes, acknowledging my presence. "What are you doing here? To see your trophy? The crazy son you managed to hospitalize?" "No, Brian, I came as your father, concerned about you." He gave a dry laugh without humor. "Father, you destroyed my life. I lost everything because of you. The wedding, the reputation, the clients." "No, Brian, you lost everything because of your own actions, your own words. I just showed the truth that you yourself created." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us like a dense cloud. "Dad, forgive me?" His voice came out small, almost childlike, reminding me of the boy he once was. I looked into his eyes, searching for some sign of genuine repentance, some spark of the child I had loved with all my strength. But I only found calculation, manipulation, one more attempt to get what he wanted. "Brian, you wished for my death for money. You called me a miserable old man in front of 400 people at your wedding that I paid for." His face contorted into a mask of rage, the mask falling quickly. "Dad, I always hated you and Mum. You were obstacles to the money. I just wanted the inheritance." The rawness of that confession hit me hard, but no longer with surprise. It was just confirmation of what I already knew in my heart. "At least you're honest now." I got up to leave. Brian shouted, his voice laden with desperation and anger. "You can't leave me here. I'm your son. You have an obligation to take care of me." "I will take care, Brian. I'll ensure you have the medical treatment you need. But our relationship as father and son who love and trust each other, that ended the moment you wished for my death for money." I left the clinic with a heavy heart, but with the certainty that I had done everything I could. The rest was in Brian's hands, the doctor's, and perhaps something greater than all of us. Weeks turned into months. The donation of my assets was realized, according to the document I had shown at the wedding. $8 million distributed among the Columbus Cancer Hospital in memory of Margaret, various orphanages in the region, and a fund for scholarships for low-income youth. I kept only what was necessary for a simple and comfortable life: my already paid-off house, a small savings for emergencies, my Federal Reserve retirement. I didn't need more. I was never a man of luxuries, and now in old age, even less so. Brian remained hospitalized. The doctors formally diagnosed antisocial personality disorder, along with episodes of psychotic breaks when contradicted or stressed. Medication kept him stable, but any attempt to reduce the doses resulted in aggressive, delusional behavior. I visited him a few times in the first months, always the same conversation. He alternated between blaming me for everything and trying to manipulate me with false remorse. Over time, the visits became more spaced out. It was too painful to see what was left of my only son. Jessica moved on with her life. I learned from Dr. Paul that she had traveled abroad to clear her head, as he put it. Later, she sent me a card from Paris, thanking me again for saving her life by revealing who Brian really was. I was happy for her. Young, beautiful, intelligent. She deserved a chance to start over, away from that sad story. As for me, I found a peace I didn't expect. The decision to donate almost all my assets, though initially motivated by the desire to prevent Brian from getting his hands on them, ended up bringing a new purpose to my life. I began to work as a volunteer at the cancer hospital, helping with financial administration. My decades of experience at the Federal Reserve proved useful for organizing the institution's finances, maximizing the impact of donations received. From time to time, someone would recognize me on the street, at the supermarket. "You're that lawyer's father, right, from the wedding?" I would just smile politely and go on my way. I didn't feed gossip, didn't give interviews, didn't exploit my family's story for notoriety. 6 months after the wedding that didn't happen, I received news that Brian had attempted suicide again, this time inside the clinic itself. He had managed to break the bathroom mirror and tried to cut his wrists with one of the shards. The nurses found him in time, but the incident led to an increase in medication, to more rigorous vigilance. The suicide attempt deeply shook me. No matter how much Brian had hurt me, he was still my son. He still carried the same blood. He was still part of me and Margaret. I cried that night alone at home, looking at old photos of our family. Where had we gone wrong? What could we have done differently? Dr. Sarah, my therapist, helped me process these feelings. "Henry, some personality disorders have a strong genetic component. It's not your or your wife's fault. You gave love, education, opportunities. The rest was beyond your control. But what if we had noticed earlier, sought help when he was young?" Early diagnosis helps, yes, but even with early treatment, some cases are very resistant. And from the behaviors you described, Brian probably already showed signs in adolescence, but they were subtle enough to be confused with normal rebellion, with a phase. That conversation didn't completely alleviate my guilt, my grief, but it helped me understand that some things are beyond our control, no matter how hard we try as parents. 2 years have passed since that fateful wedding day. Today, I'm 75 years old and live a simple life in my small apartment in the Clintonville neighborhood. I donated the big house where we used to live. It had too many memories of Margaret, and each room brought to mind moments we had lived together. It was too painful. Some ask me if I regret having donated practically everything I built in life. The answer is no. Those $8 million wouldn't make me happier. In fact, they became a blessing for many people. The cancer hospital expanded its palliative care wing, giving more dignity to terminal patients, as Margaret once was. The orphanage's renovated structures, bought educational materials, gave better conditions to children who, unlike Brian, really need a chance in life. The scholarships have already helped dozens of talented but resource-lacking young people to attend college. This is a legacy that makes me much prouder than any financial inheritance I could leave. Brian remains hospitalized. The doctors say it's a severe case. He will probably never have a definitive discharge. I visit him every 2 months. Our conversations are superficial, perfunctory. He no longer asks for forgiveness nor talks about inheritance. I think he finally understood that some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. I pay for his treatment, not out of obligation, but out of compassion. Deep down, Brian is as much a victim of his own mind as we were victims of his actions. As for Jessica, I heard she returned to Columbus recently. Dr. Paul invited me for lunch a few weeks ago and told me she is engaged again to a young man who seems to be the opposite of Brian. His words, not mine. I was happy for her. Young people deserve fresh starts. My days now are peaceful. I do my volunteer work at the hospital 3 times a week. I play dominoes with other seniors in the park on Thursdays. I attend a Bible study group on Sundays. I have a simple but rewarding routine. Sometimes on the quietest nights, I talk to Margaret as if she were sitting there in the armchair next to mine. I tell her about my day, about the small joys, about how much I miss her. I feel she hears me somehow. Life has taught me hard lessons, that we don't always raise our children to be who we dream they will be, that money can be both a blessing and a curse, depending on the heart of who desires it, that sometimes we need to lose almost everything to find what really matters. If there's something I want to leave as a message, it's value who really cares about you, not what you have or can offer. In the end, when we're about to depart this world, what matters isn't the goods we've accumulated, but the good we've done, the love we've shared, the lives we've positively touched. Brian called me a miserable old man in front of 400 people, but he was wrong. I'm not miserable. I'm a man at peace, with few material goods, but rich in purpose and peace of mind. And that, my friends, has no price. Not even 8 million can buy it. Thank you for listening to me until here. If you liked it, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. If you watched until the end, comment below the word donation. And don't forget to check out the other stories here on the channel. On the screen there are 2 that you'll like. A hug from this old man here.